What's up everyone, Alex here. I have to admit something. When Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth came out at the tail end of January, I didn't vibe with it. There were so many games coming out within a week of its release that I was somehow hoping that the game would be much different this time around, asking for it to have much faster onboarding that'll just throw me into the thick of the action right away. Realizing this, I chose not to review the game at that time, hoping that I'll revisit it later. Which of course, given how many games we've been getting lately, wasn't a guarantee. What I didn't expect is that much like Ichiban's own series of misfortunes in the game, my recent experiences with Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth proves that there is indeed a time and a place for everything, which helped me see the game in an entirely different light. And what's really crazy about all of this is that it went from being a game that totally did not vibe with me at all to being one of my absolute favorite RPGs of the year. But before I get into all of the details, let's do a little bit of housekeeping.
Check the PSI.
Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is a turn-based Japanese-style RPG with tactical elements, developed by RGG Studio and published by Sega, who provided me with this PC game code. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is a direct sequel to both 2020's Yakuza Like a Dragon and 2023's Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. And because much of the cast's backstories were established in Yakuza Like a Dragon, it is highly recommended for newcomers to at least play the aforementioned game before playing Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, as the latter serves as a continuation to the former story threads and character stories. Sega's marketing department was super busy coming up with the name Live Command RPG to describe their battle system, and I think, in this case, it actually describes Infinite Wealth's combat accurately. Much like the previous game, both your party and enemies will meander about the battlefield on their own. But unlike the previous game, once any of your party members get their turn, you're now able to move around a certain distance so you can take advantage of Infinite Wealth's new features. A lot of this has to do with buffing and incentivizing the use of the regular attack. By allowing players to move around a field and adding more mechanics to its regular attacks, RGG Studio has given us the ability to not only cause more knockdowns to happen, but also deal even more damage in the process. This allows for a ton of options, such as back and proximity attacks that trigger when attacking enemies close to you, which can then trigger additional follow-up attacks from nearby teammates, or execute powerful combo attacks with them that'll knock down a clump of enemies. It's as if your goal in Infinite Wealth is to knock down as many enemies as you can in the least amount of turns, playing a perpetual game of Rube Goldberg bowling that just gets even more fun as the game throws more enemies at you. Infinite Wealth now also shows AoE markers to help orient your fighters' attacks properly. However, because of the live nature of its combat system, this sometimes leads to attacks not behaving as expected. For instance, if your Geodancer Chitose tries to knock back an enemy with her regular attack, she will almost always hit the enemy towards her left side as the final blow, which doesn't really follow the direction of the knockback arrow at all. There are also times when enemies would leave the trajectory of AoE markers upon selecting said skills, leading to wasted MP. There are even moments when either your teammates or your opponents run around the battlefield to orient themselves differently than before. And while this doesn't happen often, it's a bit jarring to find the battlefield altered in a seemingly significant way. Ultimately, the live aspect of Infinite Wealth does give its battles a bit of that unpredictable emergent energy that other turn-based games don't have. It's not as though this little slice of randomness outright prevents you from executing some truly devastating combinations. And in some weird way, this kind of gameplay, much like how Ichiban just imagines everyone transforming into fantasy trope versions of themselves, matches Kasuga's own psyche and personality as well. After all, he is the dude with a punch perm. One other point of concern coming into Infinite Wealth was the previous game's lack of repeatable dungeons to help grind jobs. The previous game featured a sewer area that you can repeatedly come back to for this specific purpose, but this got old fairly quickly. To solve this, Infinite Wealth now features a couple of procedural dungeons that you can use to grind for experience, money, and the necessary crafting materials to upgrade or enhance your existing weapons. And as a small tip, if you find yourself constantly running around from shop to shop, trying to find the right gear for your party, you can just head into the map and press square, or whatever your platform's equivalent is, whenever you're selecting any of these locations, so you can see a description telling you what kinds of weapons and armor you can expect to buy there, along with a small list of noteworthy gear on sale. But I thought I'd drop this knowledge here, so you won't be running around too much like I have. Overall, I really enjoyed Infinite Wealth's updates to its battle system. The new features added onto the regular attack really made it a more viable choice alongside the myriad of skills you're pairing it with for each job. Being able to walk around to position yourself appropriately is a huge game changer, which helps us better manage the chaos that comes with having a battle system where both party members and enemies loiter around randomly. And when I think about things that I wish it would have improved, I stop short of saying them because the appeal of Infinite Wealth's combat lies in its unpredictability at times. Like those unexpected happenings that are the result of something you thought you planned, only to unfold in a more extravagant and more flowery way. And is that not a description of Ichiban as well? If you're new to the channel, I actually stop showing gameplay when I'm talking about a game's story because I don't want you to associate the things that I'm talking about with specific story beats. And before you ask, I'm not going to be referencing anything specific in the game, but that doesn't stop us from actually talking about the story here. As I mentioned earlier in this review, I found it very difficult to vibe with the game when I first played it way back in January. Most JRPGs kind of start you off kind of slow and plodding and taking a lot of time to establish the state of the world before giving you a taste of its gameplay. And in Infinite Wealth's case, the narrative actually spent a ton of time trying to catch us up with Ichiban and company, but it also uses this opportunity to rationalize why everybody's job levels were back to level 1 for some reason. And sadly, this kind of attention to detail kind of drops off the more you kind of get into the story, the closer it gets to the end, to the point where there were some crucial motivating factors in Ichiban's journey that are just left by the wayside by the time the credits rolled. This, of course, can be easily hand-waved by the fact that Like a Dragon and Yakuza before it are subject to the structures of Asian melodrama. As somebody who has lived in the Philippines and watched a variety of shows up until my late teens, I define Asian melodrama as kind of like a way of telling a story that has an intense focus on writing powerful emotional moments with little or no regard to reality itself. So for example, if you have a character just flying back and forth between country to country, of course the first thing that you're going to ask is like, how are they able to afford that? And that's actually a really good example of a detail that is easily hand-waved in service to advancing the writer's plot progression. And another way to think about it is that it's using reality as a basis for its fantasy. Unfortunately, what this results are various plot points that just go unresolved. I can only venture to guess that the reason why they did this is because the writers didn't exactly want to definitively close specific story threads, which gives them the ability to revisit these should they do so in the next game. But despite all of what I said, I still really enjoyed Infinite Wealth's narrative. It's the kind of bombastic insanity that just follows Ichiban wherever he goes, matching the absurdity of the many side activities and stories that he's able to partake in. And while I enjoyed the contrast of a stoic Kiryu being asked to partake in silly little side quests in the Yakuza series, Ichiban's presence lends itself to organically believing that he'd be the type of person who wouldn't say no in any situation. Besides, he's just a really good guy after all. This, of course, presents a quandary in terms of character development. Having spent a good chunk of time going through Ichiban and company's backstories in Yakuza Like a Dragon, the continuation of these story threads might be seen as non-existent in Infinite Wealth. But when you think about Ichiban's personal journey in a foreign country, coupled with the all-too-common subject matter that he seems to encounter with almost every single side quest, you'll realize that the game is trying to show you that these seemingly innocent and unconnected experiences are actually teaching Ichiban the many ways people express their love, which actually ties back to a very big moment that happens at the beginning of this game. And ultimately, while the new cast has been developed fairly well in the beginning, I can't help but think that they could have had more time in the sun, no pun intended. And as I mentioned with Asian melodrama, some villains were probably just used to the fullest extent of them just being bad guys because, they're just bad guys. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing because you have only so much time to spend with every single character after all. However, in what is going to be an unprecedented statement, given that I believe that everyone and anyone should just play games that they're interested in, I do want to advise newcomers to play Yakuza Like a Dragon first, because much of the original cast's character development was actually spent in that game. It's why Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is considered as a direct sequel to the aforementioned game, and one that, to me, has a narrative that not only amps up the stakes, but also stays firmly true to its melodramatic roots. Gameplay systems and story aside, there's actually a bunch of other things in Infinite Wealth that I really want to talk about. Like, how cool is it that Danny Trejo and Daniel Day Kim's likenesses and voices are in Infinite Wealth? I've been a huge fan of Danny Trejo since seeing him in Desperado, so seeing him in one of my favorite series, Double Wielding Machetes, warms my heart. And they even gave his crew the best music theme ever, but more on the music shortly. Fanboying aside, I also want to address the name Infinite Wealth, as I share many people's thoughts that there is no such thing in this game. It's on that similar note that I find the design of Infinite Wealth's economy to be strange. In other JRPGs, the amount of money you get from winning battles scales with the difficulty of your opponents. Infinite Wealth gates this based on how far you've gotten in the main story, with the game giving you a ton more shortly after starting Chapter 8. The common knowledge within the community is that Infinite Wealth's procedurally generated dungeons are the best way to make money. But I found that the game actually designed the availability of its side activities to reflect how much money RGG Studio expects you to earn at that specific point in the main story. This also means that much like Yakuza Like a Dragon before it, that its monetary rewards don't ever scale to how much money you'll actually need later on in the story. And while this is par for the course for the series so far, we also don't have the awesomely fun Ichiban Confections business management sim to provide us with a steady stream of income. And given that each activity's money generation is scaled to a specific portion of the story, this also means that they become less viable over time. The two exceptions to this rule are Sujimon and Infinite Wealth's procedurally generated dungeons, as they are affected by the Chapter 8 wealth scaling. Wait a minute, guys. Chapter 8? Isn't this the 8th game in the Yakuza series? And also, that looks like an infinity symbol? Is this a deliberate signal from the devs that the wealth actually comes in at that chapter? I mean, that's quite the coincidence otherwise. But I digress. Between Sujimon and Dondoko Island, I actually found Sujimon to be the more compelling side activity of the two. Dondoko Island is, for all intents and purposes, Infinite Wealth's version of Animal Crossing. But unlike Animal Crossing, where time moves forward even when you're not playing the game, Dondoko Island's progression pauses when Ichiban leaves. This means that in order for anything to progress on Dondoko Island, you have to be hands-on and present at all times in order to take advantage of its eventually measly $50,000 max payout, which only occurs when you finish upgrading your island to a 5-star resort, and only after you see all of your guests check out at the end of day 3. Dondoko Island also lets you assign Sujimon to do certain tasks for a specific span of time in exchange for earning experience and/or resources. But if, say, you assign your Sujimon a task that will last an hour, you must spend an hour in real time in Dondoko Island because time will stop once Ichiban leaves. This will also make said assigned Sujimon unavailable for combat, which ultimately rendered these sets of tasks practically useless for me. While Dondoko Island is very much separate from the rest of the game, Sujimon, on the other hand, is much better integrated. Sujimon is Infinite Wealth's version of Pokemon, complete with Sujimon battles that play more like your traditional turn-based RPG than that of the game's live command RPG system. You'll obtain Sujimon by defeating Sujimon trainers or just by simply beating up enemies while exploring the city. And when you fight enough trainers, you'll get a promotion opportunity to defeat one of the 5 gym trainers that rule the Sujimon world. As someone who's not really big on Pokemon, I really greatly appreciated the thought put into this activity, though I lament the lack of access to it when you play certain portions of the main story. Since we're talking about activities, I do want to address some that are exclusive to Kiryu later on. These activities rely heavily on your nostalgia with the character in order to properly enjoy them. As someone who's been playing Yakuza games since the PS2, I unfortunately cannot distance myself enough to see how newcomers would perceive these moments. All I can say is that these moments of nostalgia played into my journey alongside Kiryu, showing me how both people and places evolved over time as the years progressed. It's a nostalgia trip like none other, and one that rewards longtime fans who have stuck around for this long. I also want to quickly talk about the English voice performances, more specifically Kazuma Kiryu and Date-san. Date-san's performance reminded me a lot of Hop Hop from Amphibia, which distracted me a little bit. Young Ye, who joins the cast as the new voice of Kazuma Kiryu, actually did a pretty good job. There are moments in the story where you can tell that he's just slowly settling into the role, but when he's most comfortable, he's able to embody the spirit of the man really well. Let's acknowledge the fact that we all have different ideas of how Kiryu would sound like in English, with Kuroda-san being the best voice actor to have ever played this legend. But Young Yan knows just how important this role is, as well as the gravity of the responsibility he's taken on, and I can tell by his performances alone that he feels it strongly as well. Lastly, I just want to address that Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth soundtrack is a banger. Yakuza Like a Dragon had a really good battle theme, so I'm really happy to see that they took the energy of that song and smeared it across the entirety of Infinite Wealth's soundtrack. I want to bring special attention to the main battle theme of the game, called Waikiki Downbeat. The bass instrumentation in the background reminds me a lot of the bass lines of Outrun's Passing Breeze, almost serving as an homage to that game. And given how Like a Dragon and Yakuza pay homage to many Sega classics, with Crazy Eats being an homage to Crazy Taxi, for example, I feel that it just makes sense that even the song's instrumentations try to call back to Sega's past as well. In life, there's always going to be ups and downs, and depending on where we're at in our life at any given time, there's going to be either the right time or the wrong time to do certain things. I am extremely happy to have found the time to play through Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, because if I never carved out the time to do so, I would have missed out on what is absolutely one of my favorite RPGs of the year. And if you think about it, that's a pretty tall order given the amount of competition it's already stacked up against. Newcomers might want to take the time to play Yakuza Like a Dragon before diving deep into this one, and even further still in the Yakuza series, so that all of the game's nostalgic moments will hit much harder. But as somebody who's already done all of that, I am extremely happy with how many poignant and happy moments that the game's given me. And it is absolutely an adventure worthy of Ichiban Kasuga. Go play it. It's really good.